Hey everyone, welcome back to another Motivation Monday podcast for Monday, March 11th, 2019. Hope you had a great weekend and hope you're ready to get into this week with a fresh start and a new look on things. So, something I wanted to talk about today is competition in music. And this is a really interesting topic, in my opinion. And the reason I've been thinking about this is there's a brand new saxophone competition called the Michael Brecker Saxophone Competition that has just started this year. And it got me to thinking about the role that competition and things like this and the Monk competition and, various contests in music to kind of deem the next up and coming player or introduce the aspect of competition into making music. And I have a lot of really mixed thoughts on this. So, starting with the kind of pros column, I do think it's really cool for young players to prepare themselves for something like this and really get their stuff together in order to present themselves in the best fashion possible. Meaning that when you're preparing for something like this, you really have to think about how you're going to present yourself to the world on a larger scale. You have to think about a tight, compact presentation, both time limits and style limits. And it really forces you to take a step back and say, all right, what are my strengths? What tunes do I want to present to these people? And how am I going to get to this audience and this panel of other musicians so that they actually listen to and understand where I'm coming from as a musician. And I think that that's really valuable because I think outside of these competitions or this way of presenting yourself into the world, you might not think about your playing and your presentation from that angle all that often. When we're on stage presenting ourselves to an audience, it might just become something that we do and we don't think about. But all of a sudden, if you're preparing something for a world-class panel of, some of the best judges out there that are also some of the best musicians out there, now all of a sudden we start to think a little bit harder about what's going on and how we sound and, again, how we're presenting ourselves. So I do think that that's a good thing. And I think the preparation for some of these competitions and not just these super high profile competitions, but like a lot of my students audition for all-state competitions and, regional conferences and stuff like that. And I do think that's great. But what I think is great about it is that you are forced into learning a whole bunch of new material or really, really drilling down on the specifics of how you sound and what your strengths and weaknesses are. So I do think that that's very healthy. And for that reason, I do encourage my students to apply for some of these competitions and, audition for all-state and audition for certain ensembles that require you to put together an audition tape or go and do a live audition. So that aspect of competition can be really, really good. And also just thinking about how you stack up in the greater scheme of things, because that is something that you have to think about. I mean, your ability to get a job or get students or get gigs heavily depends on how you stack up to other people in your area, right? So if you're not playing up to a level of a lot of other people around you, you're not going to get the gigs. They're going to get the gigs. You're not going to get the job. They're going to get the job. So that is a really important aspect. But now moving to the other side of things, I think that too much competition in music is unhealthy. Because at the end of the day, what are we trying to do when we're playing music? We're trying to express ourselves. We're trying to get our personal voice and our personal brand on our instrument out there into the world. And if all we ever think about is trying to sound as good as so-and-so, even though that might not be how we're approaching music deep down, I think that can actually be a hindrance. And I also think if you get caught up too much in this, like, some of my students, if they don't make All-State, they think, oh, geez, I'm just a worthless player. And especially in jazz All-State, it's not like that. It's completely up to the judge. And you have to remember that If you're playing for a panel or one person who's listening to you and deciding whether you get an opportunity or not, it's completely up to them and where they're coming from. So something I like to think about is some of the most famous players in history. I know that I have discussions with a lot of people where I'll say, oh, I absolutely love this record and I love this player. And they'll say, oh man, I hate this player or I hate this record and I can't listen to it for more than 5 seconds. So it's really important to realize that taste is objective, right? So you're not going to be able to please everybody, nor should you try to please everybody, because all that's going to do is dilute the original voice that you are trying to present to the world. And at the end of the day, you have to have a little bit of confidence in your voice and what you're trying to put out there in the world. And again, not try to please everybody, because you know what they say, if you try to please everybody, you're not going to please anybody. And I think that that's a really wise statement and a really wise way to approach playing music. So to most of you out there that listen to this podcast that are not going to be applying for the Michael Brecker saxophone competition or are not going to be applying to the Monk competition, this definitely has ramifications in your own life. So think about maybe you're going out to a jam session, okay? And somebody calls a tune at, this insanely fast tempo. And maybe the person that takes a solo before you is just playing these burning, ripping bebop lines, all eighth notes in double time. And you might feel the pressure to try to play into that person's game, for lack of a better word. So you might feel pressure to actually start playing like that person, even though it might not be your voice. And this is not something that you need to feel sorry about. I mean, competition is human nature. We want to be able to compete, but we have to kind of set that instinct aside when it comes to music, because what you're going to end up doing is just getting yourself into a situation you can't get out of. So if you can't play a bunch of burning bebop lines at 300 BPM, why even try to do it? Just continue working on it if that's what you want to be able to do, and then play to your current ability. Nobody's going to care, right? And again, the stakes are much lower for us than somebody who's in front of the judging panel at the Monk competition. So try to get rid of that pressure to compete with everybody around you. And you know what? Maybe if you are somebody who breaks that cycle of competition and playing outside of your natural abilities and your natural voice as a musician, that can carry over and lessen the pressure on other people at that jam session or at that gig, right? So basically what I'm trying to say is that listening to other people that are better than you and using that base instinct of a human being to want to be as good as them and maybe want to even be better than them, I think is really healthy. And preparing yourself when you're in the practice room by yourself to try to be as good as possible and try to, be better than everybody. There's nothing wrong with that initial feeling of wanting to be able to go up there and impress people. But in the moment, don't get caught up in playing in a different style than is comfortable to you, playing in a counterintuitive way than your natural voice dictates. And this is a really, really tough thing, but I wanted to say something about it because I do see my younger students and my older students getting caught up in that feeling of wanting to compete, right? And sometimes it stands in their way of actually getting better. Now, there is one more aspect of competition that I think is very, very healthy, which is that they say a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So if you are in that spirit of competition, there's those famous cutting sessions of musicians just trying to outdo each other. And I think that that's all right, because at the end of the day, you're going to go home and practice a whole lot more if you hear somebody that's a lot better than you. So that's a very healthy aspect of it. I guess what I'm simply trying to say is don't let it get you down. And don't wake up every day thinking about music as a competition. I think that that's unhealthy if you get too deep in it. A little bit of competition here and there, very, very healthy for you. Too much competition and starting to think about music as one big competition, definitely unhealthy. Now, let me just say one more thing that I am totally aware that this particular podcast is full of contradictions. And that's simply because I have a lot of contradictory thoughts on this when I think about the things we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes on my rant here. So I'm fully aware that in one sentence I'm saying competition is good, and then in the next sentence I'm saying competition is not so good. But I think it's true, and this is just something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I think that I'm going to annoy a lot of you with this podcast, but that's all right. I just want to get the discussion out there. So let me know what you think about this. Go over to our Facebook community page, 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community. Let's start a discussion on this. Have you ever felt that pressure of competition kind of breathing down your neck? Are you somebody that gets too caught up into it? I know that I have been in the past, and I've had to work really, really hard to not have that attitude anymore and realize that there's a time and place for competition, but it shouldn't be something that I'm thinking about every day when I'm on the instrument. All right, so let's think about that this week. Let's talk about it, and I hope you all have a fantastic and inspired week. Get on the instrument and get some stuff done. All right, we'll talk to you on Friday with a regular episode. Have a good week, everybody. Bye.